Thanks for coming. Woo! Welcome to Liz Kelly's book show release combo event. Fun. Liz is gonna start by just reading a little bit from her book. Yeah. And then we're gonna do the panel.
Hello. Thanks for coming. Thanks for waiting while we get set up. And yeah, thank you so much to Basha, to Mocha Long Island, and to everyone for coming out. Some members of my family in the crowd, which is really nice. Thank you guys for being here. So as you probably know, the book is called Mood Machine, The Rise of Spotify and the Costs of the Perfect Playlist. And it's a work of reported criticism on the history of Spotify and the influence of the streaming economy on listeners and musicians. So I'll read a little bit from the introduction and then speak with our panelists about it. Can you set a timer for 5 minutes? Sure. Thanks. I'll just read for 5 minutes until that timer goes off. In the mid-2010s, I had been working as a freelance music journalist for about a decade. And like many other freelance music journalists, I of course had other jobs. One of them was at a DIY music venue in Brooklyn. If there was an indie rock or post-punk band playing in town at the time, I probably saw them, talked to them across the bar, or handed them an envelope of cash at the end of the night. As soon as I became interested in writing my first article about Spotify, the floodgates opened. All I had to do was bring up the topic of music streaming, and everyone from entrepreneurial label owners to anti-industry punks had an opinion, some intel, or a story tip. In the summer of 2016, a friend who worked in the music industry suggested that I investigate how the major labels were influencing Spotify playlists. A musician I knew from the venue linked me with my first source. It was immediately clear that playlist politics only scratched the surface of streaming-related topics deserving investigation. What started as one blog post turned into almost a decade of researching, writing, and asking questions. As it turned out, 2016 was a fascinating year to begin covering Spotify. It had been exactly 10 years since the company was founded in Stockholm by two advertising industry men opportunistically capitalizing on the music industry's weak status in their home country, thanks to the seemingly unstoppable force that was digital music piracy in Sweden. And it would only be 2 more years until Spotify went public on the New York Stock Exchange, which meant that in those days, the company was doing everything to make itself attractive to future shareholders. Everything was about shifting to profitability, a former employee told me. Everything was about a good IPO and good shareholder value. Like other technology companies in the 21st century, Spotify spent its first decade claiming to disrupt an archaic industry, scaling as quickly as possible, and attracting venture capitalists to an unproven business model. But the product itself, stream all the world's music for $9.99 per month, or for free with ads, was not turning a profit, which investors would soon demand. From the app's European launch in 2008 to its US arrival in 2011 to the stock market listing in 2018, Spotify reinvented itself repeatedly. As a social platform in 2010, an apps marketplace in 2011, a hub for what it called music for every moment by the end of 2012. The next year came its big move into curation, hiring a staff of full-time editors to compile playlists themed to moods and activities, followed by its 2014 investment in algorithmic personalization technology. All of this so-called innovation was going to level the playing field for artists, Spotify obsessively promised. What we actually got, though, were playlists heavily dominated by major label acts, endless feeds of neo-music loaded with ghost artists, anonymous stock music commissioned at a discount, and a series of pay-to-play schemes. Those included the controversial Discovery Mode program, which sells mostly independent artists and labels algorithmic promotion in exchange for reduced royalty rates, and frames it as an opportunity. The cost-saving initiative is a move popularly regarded as a new type of payola, the term that emerged in the 1950s to describe the process of record labels making under-the-table cash payments to radio stations in exchange for airplay. For artists trying to figure out how to survive these shifts, there have been, for many years, more questions than answers. I've long been confounded by the expectation that we simply accept the dealings of the powerful as unexplainable. It's a perspective informed by my background in DIY music spaces, where we try to live the reality that there are other ways to think about collective culture. Grassroots music communities often work directly to demystify the process of making, distributing, and sharing art. If you show up to a gig an hour before doors, someone might ask you if you could help set up chairs or run to the store for some ice. At the end of a show, it's not uncommon to discuss what each band was paid and whether the splits were fair. When it comes to recordings and labels, transparency is held as a foundational ideal worth aspiring to. With music streaming, it was jarring watching independent artists become convinced to accept a new system that no one could understand. And that's the 5-minute mark, so if you want to find out what happened next, you can pick up a book. I'll have to do it.
Thanks, Liz. Okay, you guys want to switch your microphones on? Sweet.
Hello.
Hello. Great, and we're going to share. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming to this. This is Liz Pelly's Mood Machine book release out on Long Island. Thanks. Thanks for reading that. I was like, oh, Mood Machine. I had a little bio for Mood Machine, but I think everyone got the gist. It's about Spotify. It's kind of mood, Spotify, but to say the least. But here's a couple bios about our panel. Liz Pelly is a writer and editor based in New York. Her first book, Mood Machine, The Rise of Spotify and the Cost of the Perfect Playlist, was published in January 25 by One Signal Publishers. Her byline has appeared in The Baffler, The Guardian, NPR, Pioneer Works Broadcast, and many other outlets. She is an adjunct instructor at NYU Tisch. Great. Anna's next. Anna Gatza. Anna Gatza is a senior editor at Pitchfork. She lives in Brooklyn. You can find her writing in Pitchfork, Yahoo Entertainment, Artsy, and the Financial Times. And then on the end is Ariel Gordon, who's a writer and editor, living in New York, currently based in Brooklyn. Her work can be found in publications including Pitchfork, The Ringer, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and the New York Times. If you want to say anything else about yourself, you're welcome to. All right, cool.
2 out of 3 of us are from Long Island.
Yeah. You want to say where?
Oh, yeah.
So I thought it was worth noting that 2 out of 3 of us are from Long Island. I'm from Massapequa, and
I'm from Roslyn.
Long Island. Yeah. Sorry, Anna. All right.
No, that's beautiful. I'm from Illinois. Hi.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with a question for the panel. Let's just break it up, everyone. How and why did everyone get involved in writing about music? Because you all write about music.
Let's go to your friends.
all right, well, I'll start by saying how I got involved in music first, and then I'll tell you how I started writing about it, which is that I got involved in music through the local pop punk scene on the South Shore of Long Island in the early 2000s. My sister here up in the front says I haven't been talking about that enough in my book interviews. So let the record show. Shout out to the downtown in Farmingdale. I wouldn't be here without you. And I started writing about music actually first on LiveJournal and as a teenager, and then started writing for various outlets. Interned at the Long Island Press when I was in high school, went to journalism school, and I worked at an alt-weekly newspaper after I graduated called the Boston Phoenix.
When I was in high school, that was really the peak era of MP3 blogs, mostly completely amateur operations that would post tracks that you could download, and that's how I started getting really into indie rock. at that time. And then I got involved in my college radio station, and that's how I started like writing about music, because we needed people to screen the CDs before they went on the shelves to warn the DJs if they had like curse words on them, essentially. But you can kind of take it a little farther and talk a little more about what this sounds like, and I just have written that into a full career, and it still surprises me.
Yeah, I feel like as a teenager on Long Island, I was also just on Tumblr the whole time writing about music for people who probably nobody actually. Then when I was like in high school, I realized that if you write about shows, you get to go to the shows for free. So I started writing for really small blogs like Brooklyn Vegan, which is based in Brooklyn, kind of, and like Impose magazine, also based in Brooklyn, and then it just kind of went. From there, and wasn't paid at first, and sort of love the game.
Thanks. Liz, one for Liz. What made you want to start writing about Spotify in particular? Because you've been writing about it for a long time, even before the book.
Yeah, so I started writing about Spotify in 2016, and at that point I had been working as I said in the introduction of the book, I had been working as a freelance music journalist for about a decade. And at the same time, I also had, in addition to having sort of like one foot in the world of journalism, I also always had one foot in the world of just being involved in local music. So I booked shows, had a radio show, helped run a few different venues. So I feel like as a participant in independent and underground music, to me, that sort of involvement has always also encompassed interrogating the centers of power in music and culture. And I think around when I started doing the writing in 2016, it seemed like the definition of what we talk about when we talk about independent music was sort of changing to include not just independence from the major record labels, which historically the phrase independent music has referred to music scenes and communities and labels that exist outside of or as an alternative to Sony, Warner, and Universal, the major record labels. And it seems like the definition of that phrase was sort of expanding to also maybe require an interrogation of these really large technology companies that were increasingly the partners of the major record labels, but were selling themselves to independent musicians as these sort of democratizing forces for culture. So that was sort of what got me interested at first.
Also, if you guys ever want to, if you
Can
ever
I
have a
ask a related question?
please.
Spotify's been around for a while. It will probably continue to be around for a while. What made you decide that this was the right time for this book?
Also a really good question, because I feel like the thing that initially gets you interested in writing about a subject doesn't always remain the thing that makes you continue when writing about the subject. And then basically, as soon as I wrote my first big essay about Spotify for this magazine called The Baffler, which is an amazing leftist journal of culture and politics that everyone should check out. There's a Baffler, right?
Subscriber.
Amazing. Shout out to The Baffler. Most of my writing about this subject appeared in The Baffler before it appeared in this book. And so as soon as I wrote my first big essay for The Baffler, I pretty quickly heard from publishers and literary agents asking if I had considered maybe doing a book on the subject instead of just writing essays about it. But at the time, it seemed like the essay that I wrote had kind of made somewhat of an impact, or I was getting a lot of positive feedback on it, and I had other ideas for other stories that I wanted to write, but I wanted to write them more quickly than the pace that a book would require. And I think also part of it was just sort of I don't really know if I'm ready to write a book about this subject, or if there's a book there. But I did 2 years later, I started working on a book proposal in 2019. And then the pandemic happened, and I spent a really long time thinking about the organization of what a book like this would look like, and the table of contents, and how I would structure it in a compelling way. So I think the idea for a book was always kind of floating in the background. It was just when it was the right time, and eventually this thing kept happening, which is when I really decided, okay, maybe it's time to write a book. It was in 2021. I was putting out new pieces in the Baffler and some other publications about Spotify, what would always happen was someone on the internet would be like, how could you write about this and not cover this topic, and this topic? And I would say, well, I actually wrote about that like 4 years ago, like here's the link. And it just like made me realize that there was maybe more of a need for the whole story to exist in context, and that especially in 2020 and 2021, there was a lot of like musician-led organizing around Spotify, and it seemed like maybe writing a book would be like a useful resource in, you know, this like ongoing work for other people.
Steal that back and go rogue. I had this much later, but you kind of touched upon it. You're all writers in 2025, whether that be full-time, like writing a book, or part-time, or being a senior editor. What is that like? Yeah, in the world of like in which Liz details very well, the world of like algorithms, big tech, kind of dictating our interests, newspapers closing, etc. Yeah, what's it like being a writer in 2025, especially for music?
I feel like an endangered species, I think. I think you could kind of write an entire other book, companion book to this book, about how the media industry has been reshaped by tech initiatives. And like, for an example of that, I would say, like, for example, how the Facebook has like changed their algorithms periodically over the years to like prioritize or deprioritize outside links, or like to prioritize video content. And then we had that big rush of people making video content, and then it all went away because there was no actual money in that business model, and they didn't find out until later. Sorry, I'm getting a little off track here, but no, certainly like in a way that is parallel to musicians, but not directly connected because of how these platforms have sort of divided up the content and caused the revenue to flow to themselves rather than to like individual creators. I think you do see a lot of the same consolidation and like hollowing out of the power centers and the like that you would see in media. And I think a lot of people on the individual level are feeling a little bit lost, and like there is not really like a secure progression, and that the old markers of success do not mean what they used to mean anymore. And like, you know, possibly huge congratulations to Liz for writing this book. This book's amazing. I think many people out there would find that like even writing a book, like it's not, that doesn't mean job security, right? Ariel, would you like to say?
No, I agree, but I feel like what's been exciting, I guess, about the like, I think there was a moment when a Pitchfork score could really make or break an artist, and it felt very, like, I think this current moment, if there is a benefit of it, is that perhaps we could see like what music criticism looks like outside of like a Capital result or something like this, like where it's not necessarily that an artist has to blow up for a review to be meaningful, and maybe we're looking at reviews as more like a narrative structure to reveal more about like the art and the scene around it. Pitchfork's always done that, but I think it's if that's any benefit, it's just that now that it's not as much of a tastemaker because we have these outside influences from Spotify or TikTok or whatever, you know, you could focus on maybe doing more with the prose than the format might previously allow.
Yeah, just to maybe talk to like some of the material reality of making a career as a music writer. I can speak more specifically to trying to make a career as a music media critic, I guess. Like I think that what I do is like music writing as much as it's media criticism, and with the types of work that I was doing before writing this book, like long form reported cultural criticism, you know, I was lucky to find like a few opportunities of getting paid fairly to do some like deep dives, but I definitely, one of the other inspirations for writing the book was I had this moment where I was like, okay, I need to either get a book advance or go to grad school in like a funded program in order to continue doing this work. And a bunch of my friends who had been to funded PhD programs for media studies were like, you should just try to write a book. So yeah.
Did it work? Yeah. Do you feel like you have to go to grad school now?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, that I guess I'm figuring out what happens next. Yeah.
Yeah, aren't we all?
I had like a kind of fast follow from that. I'm really interested, as you mentioned earlier, about how you thought about like piecing together a book, I just imagine like a beautiful mind map where you just have like all the different chapter names. But how do you take it from a series of essays in the Baffler to a like well-structured book?
And it is so well structured, guys. Like, I would not just be saying this to you. I think there are music books out there that are like not nearly as like well written and well organized as this one. And like when Liz says that she put a lot of thought into the organization, I also would love to know how you did this, because it is so smooth and it really just like sucks you through a lot of really complicated like intersecting ideas.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of revision. Like the first version of, I spent like, it wasn't consistent work, but definitely like wrote the first version of the table of contents in 2019, and even the one that when I sold my book in 2022, I'd been like thinking about the table of contents essentially for like all that time. I mean, I found it really hard to work on this stuff during the pandemic, so there was definitely a break at some point, like in 2020. But even the table of contents that was in the book proposal in 2022 is like really different from the table of contents here. Something that I think was an advantage is that because I started writing this book, when I started writing the book, I'd been covering the subject for 5 years, and in addition to like covering it, also getting a lot of feedback on the subject, and also doing a lot of like public speaking and events and having conversations with people at events like this, and starting to get a sense of like what are the things that people really care about, and what are the things that like hook in people who maybe haven't thought about this before. So something that I knew with the subject matter that the book covers is that I really wanted there to be stuff about like how streaming platforms influence listeners and listening for like the average streaming user, which is, I'm not sure if that's a concept that actually exists, but like, you know, like for someone who's never thought about this stuff before, what are the things that they'll really care about when it comes to like how streaming services might be impacting their relationship with music? But then I also wanted to make sure that there was a lot of stuff about like the material reality for musicians and the ways in which like it has become harder to make a living as a musician, and how independent record labels have been affected. And I just like had this realization that I think that like most people are going to be drawn in by how it impacts them. So I kind of started start more with like, here are some ways in which like this, like when you open Spotify and you look at Spotify, like what are you looking at, and what are the different things that have shaped what are you looking at, and start there with like the user experience, and then like try to like guide people into some maybe bigger questions about how the industry has changed. Like, you know, obviously the chapter explaining the royalties system is not going to be the first chapter of the book, even though sometimes you talk to musicians and they're like, I can't believe that's not the first thing you talk about, is like how we only make 0.0035 cents per stream on average. It's like, well, sorry, but like there's a lot of people that don't care, even though I care a lot. And it's like one of the main things that makes me want to write this book. And in a lot of ways, like the purpose for the book's existence is to make people think about the devaluing of music. But I think you kind of have to like, you know, bring people to that point somehow structurally.
I have a question I wanted to ask you that I think will be of interest to everyone, which let's talk about what music critics mean when we say that music sounds like it belongs on streaming, or sounds like it was like streaming optimized, or we call something like stream bait pop. Like, I think that can mean several different things at once, and several different things depending like on what genre we're talking about, but like, can we unpack that a little bit?
For sure, yeah. I think that, I mean, in some ways I'm like, oh, is this just something that like music critics invented, like to describe music that we think sounds really boring? And I definitely think that at a certain point I felt, because I wrote this essay in 2018 called Stream Bait Pop that was about how, in some ways it was sort of about how the rise of the chill playlist as this sort of streaming era phenomenon, like the chill vibes playlist is like something, so many people have their own version of a chill playlist. There's that phrase really at a certain point felt like it had like taken over the streaming interface. You know, there's so many people who, when they sit down to do work, put on like chill beats to study and relax to, or something like that, and just sort of like unpacking this idea of the chill vibes playlist. And that piece, Stream Bait Pop, had sort of been like, okay, how's the prevalence of like these sort of like smooth background listening playlists incentivized to the creation of certain types of music, or the popularity of certain types of music that could do really well in the background, and what impact is that actually having on the sound of pop music? And at the time when I started talking to pop songwriters about this, it was a time when, for example, like Billie Eilish was becoming really popular. And it's no like shade to Billie Eilish as a songwriter, like, but I think that there are like certain mechanisms of the way in which people receive media and information now in a really passive way that does in some ways sort of privilege music that would do better in a passive or lean back environment. And it's been super interesting, like seeing how not just like certain musicians will see that as a goalpost in their songwriting, but also like we'll see certain songs in their catalog doing better than other songs. But yeah, what do you guys think?
What does it mean to be like streaming optimized? It's so subtle, and it is partly something you've kind of made up because all genre descriptors are something that is kind of being made up and being applied in a specific instance. It means not aggressive, right? It is like the opposite of aggressive. It can often mean sort of like a if you have vocals, no one is divaing out. They're on a much like more level register, like less. It means less dynamic range. It means like maybe I don't know. I've been thinking about this too, just thinking about this in preparation for this talk, because I think you could say that like something that is very stream friendly, like in a hip hop song, is going to sound different than something that is very like stream friendly in like a synth pop song.
Yeah, you will hear certain things though, like even with for example, like calming neoclassical music is like really popular in the streaming era because a lot of people just want to put on like a really calming like piano playlist while they're doing work. And I've even heard from like some people who make that kind of music, like, oh, curators don't want you to use a real piano. They only want you to use like a like felt pad. Yeah, someone who plays piano might understand this more. Like there's only a certain type of piano sound they want that like hits the ears a little bit less intensely, which is like kind of even funny to say for like solo piano calming music. There's just certain sounds that will like hit the ear in a different way to be like more washed out, I think, and I think that's kind of part of it too.
Both washed out but catchy, because you want to keep people engaged, and so it's like that sense that you are constantly mediating between, is this too boring or is this interesting enough, and you hear a lot of it, and then eventually you start to pick it out a little bit, and you're like, I feel like there's not a statement being made here as much as just like a level that is being maintained.
Yes, vibes.
It reminded me of the chapter that's like, I forget the exact title in your book, but it's like the first 0.035 seconds are the best or whatever. Sorry, I'm butchering that, but
the first 0.0035 is the hardest.
Great title.
I wanted to ask if we could recap something in the book.
They might not have read.
Oh, it's a reference to like, historically in the music business. Sorry, I don't know who said it. Someone famously said the first million's the hardest, but now it's like the first 0.0035 cents is the hardest.
Yeah.
Shout out to Joe Steinhardt of Don Giovanni Records. He tweeted that, and it became my chapter title.
I think like this might have been slightly, or like on a different part of the chapter, it was like the part about the songwriting camps. I think that was really interesting when we talk about like stream bait pop. In her book, I mean, you can probably describe it better, but Liz interviews in like a bunch of people who went to these like songwriting camps that Spotify hosted, and that feels like Spotify is giving you a prescription for how to write a pop hit, and some of the other things that are kind of opposite of piano that's even softer than piano is like chorus first, you think about espresso, you think about, I don't know, Sweep with Psycho, and it's just like songs that tell you exactly what they are in the first millisecond are also, I think, the other side of that stream bait pop coin.
Putting the chorus first because you're like, it's the best part, let's do it right away. Like, eat dessert first. That's definitely a bit of a streaming pop mentality. I wanted to ask you if you could sort of recap something to me. This is something to me that was sort of one of the most surprising, memorable anecdotes in this book is a songwriter who is not someone who is being invited to professional songwriting camps, but someone who is working on his own named Lance Allen. And could you like recap the story of what happened to Lance?
Yeah, totally. I hope one day I'll get to have a conversation with Lance Allen. So this songwriter came on my radar during a time where I was closely studying the blog of the Spotify for Artists operation. So Spotify internally has this program called Spotify for Artists, which is the artist-facing department of the company where they they're like, oh, here's some resources on like how as an artist you can make the most of Spotify. And they have a blog, and they had this blog post that was like, Lance Allen is the face of DIY success in the streaming era. And he was an instrumental guitar player, a family man from Tennessee, who is a guitar teacher, and he talks about in this blog post about like his approach to DIY success in the streaming era, about how like he was just really studying the Spotify playlist ecosystem, and he realized that there was this song called this playlist, really popular playlist called Acoustic Concentration that had a lot of music on it that sounded like his music, and he was like, I made it my life's mission to get on Acoustic Concentration. Like, I looked up all of the other people that were on this playlist. I looked at other playlists they were on. I pitched to those playlist curators. I emailed people nonstop. I made playlists that had all the artists on Acoustic Concentration plus me, and I paid for Instagram ads to like help seed my song in algorithmic discovery pools similar to artists. And finally, like through the magic of like his DIY hustling, he got on Acoustic Concentration, and it changed his life, and he bought a pickup truck, and he paid off part of his mortgage, and like everyone should be, and they were really celebrating him, being like, everyone should do what he's doing because he's the new face of DIY success in the streaming era. And partially I'm like, okay, like, you know, you do you, like whatever, like everyone's trying to make a living in the music business however they can. It definitely, to me, seemed more kind of like platform gamification that they were celebrating than necessarily like sustainable tips for artists to make a living in the streaming era. So not like to spoil, but Lance Allen comes up in like a couple of different places in my book in telling that story to like show how Spotify at the time, this was like 2019 I think, was sort of celebrating these specific tactics for success. But then something else that I cover in my book is the rise of what I call ghost artists, and how one of the big investigations of my book that I spent like a year on was investigating this internal practice at Spotify where around 2017 they started to specifically work with stock music agencies to commission music for a lower royalty rate to fit certain playlist categories so that they could replace real artists on their playlists with this like low royalty rate, cheaper stock music. And yeah, you know, not to give it away too much, but the next time that Lance Allen comes up in my book is like a sadder story about him starting to like, you know, find that his songs too have been replaced by stock music on some of these playlists. And I think it's such a great example of like, you know, just how unsustainable it is to wrap up all of your success as an artist in one platform. And not even just as a musician, for like any of us who make creative work, like putting too much trust and faith into one corporate platform as like your sole revenue source is not super sustainable.
That one's really gonna like stick with me. I can't imagine being that guy. And that it worked in the first place. And that I think speaks to the level of like, another big theme of this book is like the surveillance, the data surveillance, and the amount that this man was able to like start associating his tracks with related tracks, and that the system eventually somehow like picked up on that and started, and it becomes that cycle that like you get a little bit of success, and then what's the thing that becomes most successful is the thing that already had success.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to speak to that, or should we move on? We'll do it. All right. Yes, Spotify. Yeah, that's like messed up. I think we can all right. But like, is Spotify a necessary, like, way oversimplification? But is Spotify a necessary evil in our lives? Like, do you guys use it to listen to music? Liz, you're in a band. Like, do you have your music on Spotify? I don't know if I should even be. Is it okay? Or am I like outing you right now? Okay.
No, I'm in a band and our music is only on Bandcamp, but I also like understand that that doesn't work for all artists, but for my purposes, it's on Bandcamp, and also you can also download it for free on the internet, like on our website. And I yeah, I think that the necessarily evil question is really interesting because that's actually come up in like a bunch of music writers who have like positively reviewed my book have talked about how like, yeah, all these criticisms are super legit, but unfortunately it's just a necessary evil of my career. And I sort of push back on that, not only because at the end of the book I outline a constellation of alternatives and other ways of thinking about engaging with music. I'm like a really big champion of building your own digital library. I also write a lot about the role of the public library in providing access to digital music. A lot of public libraries provide you access to something called Hoopla, which basically is a free streaming service. And if we're going to I'm like pro universal access to music. I just think that there are other ways that we could think about making music universally accessible outside of the corporate music industry, whether it be like through public libraries, through artist-run alternatives, through buying music and sharing it with people. I guess that kind of sounds like I'm advocating for piracy, but these are complicated questions. I think I push back on something I specifically write in the book is that I feel like. Corporate power like forecloses our sense of possibility, not just by controlling the marketplace, but also by convincing us that there are no alternatives. That's like one of the ways in which corporate media and the centers of power in the culture industry have like always sort of like attempted to maintain their position is additionally just like convincing people that there are no alternatives. So I think that it's always really important to me to kind of like push back on that and point to the alternatives that do exist, whether it be, buying music directly from artists, like using a different app like Bandcamp, like supporting independent music retail, your local record store, independent community radio stations, like I don't know which ones reach out to Patchogue, but there are amazing community radio stations in New York City that are, if what you're looking for is like more of like a lean back experience or passive listening during the day, which I think is why a lot of people turn to streaming services. Like I do think that there's just a different type of relationship that happens when you're listening to like public radio or community radio or something instead. And there also are some like interesting and exciting artist-run alternative platforms that have that are like currently being worked on and that I sort of wished like had launched before my book was done, but I know that there are like a lot of artists currently working to try to build alternative streaming services too. So I think in the coming years, hopefully we'll like see some more stuff like that pop up.
I'm gonna open up the question if that's okay, because I'm interested. Are we gonna get to a post-algorithm world? Because I think a lot of us are really hoping for that. Like, are we moving past like this kind of age of the internet? Do you hope that? You don't have a crystal ball, but like, what do you hope it looks like? Which I'm interested in your responses as like individuals with like social media, obviously, and like you have your own individual lives online, but also your writers who get paid to like write about music. So that as well, in kind of a personal and professional context, what is the post-algorithm world and will we get there?
I'm not sure. I try not to, like I mostly use Apple Music, just being upfront with you. I do not ever engage with any of the programmed or algorithmic playlists at all, like never ever. Why would I need to? And that's kind of my attitude to it. But like when we say like, is it a necessary evil? Well, I know it's not necessary because I was a music fan before they invented this. I remember what that was like. Is it too deeply ingrained to go back now? It worries me that maybe it is. We have a whole generation of music fans now who this is the only way that they have ever like understood about like interacting with music outside of maybe buying vinyl records. And no, I think what you said about just kind of like that is something that forecloses possibilities for people. And so I don't know how to get out of it myself, and I can make my choice to like disengage like from social media algorithms, for example, and then I find that I'm missing out and that I don't know what's going on, and then I get pulled back in.
Yeah, I do think the internet is here to stay, but I feel like there are parts of streaming that are really they alienate you from the media that you consume in so many ways. And so I am still on Apple Music, but my impetus to get off of it is that I used to have an MP3 library, and Apple Music, as does Spotify, like, or maybe Spotify just hosts your files locally, but Apple Music tries to find and replace so many songs with things that they think are the songs that you want. There was like a specific Sharon Van Etten song where I was like, this is my last like straw, where it just got replaced with a different version, which was also lovely, but not what I had. So I think the future is just like, a part of it might just be convincing folks that the product is bad and that like what they're getting is a degraded product when you're using a streaming platform, and that ownership of your metadata is powerful and interesting. I am an engineer, so I have some, like, I think I'm biased towards that in my other life, but yeah.
One of my color flags of Post-it note that I put in the book is about what I just labeled as like the idea of like corporate capture, which is anytime in the book when I saw an example of like organic music community fan culture being monetized by Spotify, and like a really obvious one would be like, we used to make mixtapes for fun, now you make a playlist and it like seeds their data program. I'm hopefully maybe some of the momentum around like this book, and I would even say things like the attempted TikTok ban are things that are kind of making people open their eyes a little bit and say, maybe we need to think about how we used to do cultural production before we had these platforms. And God, this sounds terrible to say, but like, does it take something much more drastic to make more people get invested in doing it the old-fashioned way? And I think on the way here, we were talking about like, Liz was talking about how she used to like be really into like MySpace, and that was like, you know, kind of the hub of like the local music scene, you know, back when. And like, y'all maybe remember a few years ago, MySpace wiped their entire music like library. Like they deleted it. I'm sure many people's like high school bands just had their whole archives like wiped out. I absolutely do not wish that for the streaming services that exist now, but like I can't rule out that something like that would never happen, right? Like who knows what kind of climate catastrophe could like hit the data center. I don't know, something that's like, there's an archival issue here too, and I hope more people start thinking about it.
I'm kind of like thinking about something that like Liz, you and I spoke a couple weeks ago for an interview, and you brought up, I guess I'm stealing your thunder, the idea of the queue as an antidote to the feed.
Oh yes, I do think about this a lot.
Yes, do you want to say more?
Oh.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about that too. I will say there are two things that I think in recent years have made me feel like people really do crave a sort of like return to a individual like a recommendation from an individual like critic or curator or musician, which is like the popularity of music newsletters, which I think have been like popped up. Like the email newsletter has kind of emerged in the past 4 to 5 years as kind of like a new media model that a lot of journalists rely on to connect with their audiences, and the popularity, I think, of them sort of speaks to how badly people just want like one recommendation for one song from one person, at least in music. And then also the popularity of internet radio stations, like in New York City, there's like this really popular radio station I actually just DJ'd on yesterday called the Lot Radio, and it's kind of like emerged as this like hub for independent music culture. And I think that a lot of people turn to that as kind of like an alternative to the algorithm. And I always shout out this app called Radio Garden, which is like this app where it's just a globe and you can kind of scroll around and listen to radio stations all around the world. And then, okay, so beyond that, your question. Yeah, I think something I think about a lot is how in the platform era, people have become really sort of dependent on the feed to give them information. Like they scroll through their Instagram feed or they scroll through their Spotify feed of recommendations, and how people have become really reliant on just being provided information, provided music, provided content. And I think that one way of sort of busting out of that a little bit is really intentionally maintaining a listening queue, like whether it's a playlist, even just like I have a notes app on my phone where like anytime someone recommends something, it's like, okay, I write it in I have like listening queue notes app. And I know it's like everyone has their own way of maintaining their cue, but just having a really strong sense of like, this is the next thing I want to listen to. So when you have those moments where you're like, I want to put some music on, what do I want to listen to? Instead of just being like, well, I'll just put on daily mix #1 and get played an algorithmic mix of stuff that I've listened to over the past month. I will go to my list of things that I've been meaning to check out for a really long time, or this list of things that I know, someone I know recommended to me, and use that as like the starting point.
Just like start treating music like it's your job. Start asking, who are the songwriters on this? What other songs did they write? Go look at who else sampled this track? Who did it better? Like, there's just so many ways to go, and you don't, to me, it never starts with like a feed of recommendations. If that list of recommendations already exists, that is like reason enough for me to go find something new.
Absolutely. I think people have questions. You guys have questions. Someone might.
Can I say one other thing?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Also, one other thing that I always like to shout out is that a few years ago, some of my friends and I had a listening club, like a book club, but just for listening to music. And especially if you're like, well, that sounds like a good idea, but how do I even know like what to put on my queue, or like that listening clubs, like I think we sort of value like other forms of culture a little bit differently, like books. I feel like even the fact that in our world it's much more common to have a book club than necessarily like a listening club, I think kind of illuminates that a little bit. But yeah, start listening clubs.
Yeah, also we're totally going to do questions in case people have questions, but I did want to say one thing, which you totally answered already, which is, we've been, like, I think for the last couple minutes talking about solutions. Solutions are great, and I think you guys are all part of the solution by being here and coming to this event that blends, like, music and a book and is independent, and if you want a little more, maybe we'll just quickly, I think, for me personally, I'll put my own flavor on it. I think anything, like any independent art supporting that in 2025 in the world of like tech taking over in the world we live in, like Nuff said, I think supporting independent arts in 2025 any way you can, whether it be paying $10 to come to this or seeing the show at PAC. Thank you, PAC, for having us, supporting space like that. What we did, how we like collaborated, I think is like I think that's all just very subversive. And that's also kind of why I started booking shows a little bit recently, again. So if you guys, we'll take questions in a sec, but if you want to just kind of end on, I think this is like a nice note to end on, like the importance of supporting like independent arts and music in 2025 and how we'll make the world better together.
Yeah, I think, just maybe to give kind of like a big picture kind of generalized answer, just remembering that music and culture is something that you can participate in and, not just something that you can consume. Like if music and art and culture is something that is meaningful to you, like going to shows, sharing music with your friends, writing about it, starting a blog, like, go to the shows that Basha books.
Do you have a personal mission of like how you're engaging with art? This is a good question. I don't know if I had one prepared.
It's just more fun that way. Like, you walk in a gig, you might run into someone you know. You're never gonna run into somebody when you open up Spotify.
Yeah, we went to high school together. What's up?
We did.
But that's what makes it better. Like, I kind of don't like going to Webster Hall and being like an arena. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I'm seeing Kiss. Like, whatever. Like, I have to go to the arena. But like the mid-sized venue, I just went to Music Hall Williamsburg, and I was like, oh, I'm like miserable. Like, this is horrible. Like, I'm just like, everyone's just really close together and no one knows each other. And I much prefer like spaces like this. But yeah, I find, no offense to like Music Hall, because I'm sure some of you guys like Music Hall, but I don't know. I find this like so much more community. It's just like, it's almost like watching TV versus like going to a party. Like. Just seeing people you know.
Culture is not supposed to be immediate gratification every time, and like something that I could certainly work on more is like showing up for the opening bands. Some of them are not going to be for me, right? But like I showed up for an opening band the other night, and they were so good. Oh my god, I would have never seen them otherwise, right? Like, who was it? It was Comet. A little, right? Not the most memorable name, however, was really good.
Shout out to Katie Pink. Would have never seen her otherwise if I didn't go for the opening band.
So I guess I'll just thank you all. I think we'll just take questions in a sec, but thank you all again for coming and doing the good work. So thanks for making the world a little better. Do any of you have any questions? And you can just yell.
Basha, did you book the show?
Yeah, I did. I think that was Jake. Thanks, Jake. I don't know who that is.
No, it's so cool to see Long Island DIY like
Right?
in your hands. I
Hey,
feel like
thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I was like, hey, there's space for a lot more out here than what there is. And there's some really great stuff out here. And I was inspired by that, but I was like, hey, we can have a book release party music show at the gallery when the show is up. Check out the show, by the way.
This is a listening club. We have a question in the back row.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things I think about the rise of streaming and also social media like TikTok is that you get songs from many or several years ago all of a sudden becoming hits. Like some artists that come to mind like Pavement, Life Without Buildings, Steve Lacy, Alex G, even like Mama Cass, Moms and the Papas. Like all these songs years later all of a sudden becoming like huge. And I'm curious, do you think that's changed the attitudes of the music industry a little bit, or artists, kind of that knowledge that, we don't need to have a hit right now, maybe in a couple of years or something it'll take off. Do you think that sort of knowledge is changing?
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I do think that like one opportunity has certainly been for what the music industry calls them like catalog artists in the music business. Anything that is 18 months or older is called catalog, which is super interesting because I definitely have not gotten to listen to all of the records from 18 months ago that are still on my like to listen to list. So it is super interesting. And then stuff that is newer than 18 months, the music industry calls like frontline, which is like the stuff that they're actively working to market and try to break through. One way in which it has really changed is that there has been a massive wave of financial interest in buying up catalogs of music because venture capitalists see music as a asset class upon which they can see like a return on investments, because you never know when a song could like blow up and all of a sudden a song from like 20 years ago could become a valuable monetary like return because of streaming. So in one way I do think it has encouraged like the participation of the finance industry and venture capital in the music business in a way that like lots of people have written about more than I have as a it's really interesting because certain people in the music business will be like, see, music has value again, like Blackstone wants to invest in music, and it's like oh, they're like, see, like, this is like, like music has value. But in other cases, like, I think the way it seems to me is like that a lot of like, you'll see things like, not even just pop stars, but even like mid-level bands will sell the rights to their whole catalog to some random like venture capital investor because it gives them like a flat, $10,000 or $100,000 or something. And I think it's because like people don't really see any other way of having a career in music at a certain point other than like selling off their catalog to the highest bidder. So, there's one argument where it's like this signals the return to value of music, and there's another way of thinking about it where people are actually that desperate that they're like participating in this way of thinking about culture that treats music like it's the stock market.
Should have bought Duster stock.
Yeah, you definitely should have bought Duster stock.
I fear that might actually be kind of the next business model, honestly. No, I'm like, and you think about it's so insidious, right? And it used to be maybe an old track would get used in like the credits of a popular movie, and like then it would have a resurgence of popularity, and like now that's a fun thing that like anybody can do like on their iPhone at home, but it also encourages like this financialization of the industry, and it's dizzying like to see how that like escalates.
That was a little like crypto, right?
I was gonna
You
say,
were
isn't that just an
partialized
NFT?
ownership, yeah.
No, I do fear that someone's next dumb business model that they are like shopping at some tech conference right now is like, we've got all these fans, they're obsessed about the chart positions, they're huge, they're devoted to these pop artists, like what if we could get them to start betting real money in the same way that people are now betting real money on sports, right? Like I think it's a really kind of evil way for the society to go, but I also don't think it's unrealistic.
Yeah, just yell it out. Go ahead.
Yeah, how do you feel like the streaming platform, like the different streaming platforms kind of affect how people like digest music? Like for example, I feel like Spotify, definitely being more song-based, more algorithmically based, you find a lot of people who, you tend to find a lot more of those like chart watchers. They tend to use Spotify all the time. Meanwhile, you see somebody uses like Bandcamp or Apple Music. They tend to be more album listeners, I find, at least in my experience. And do you think that may be like a change, like even just the elimination of Spotify as like the streaming platform itself would do a big thing in like increasing people's actual engagement with the music,
One thing that just strikes me off the top is that Spotify is the platform that puts those listenership data numbers like right where you can see them, and like that doesn't exist on Apple Music or Bandcamp, like unless you're counting all the little boxes of people who bought the Bandcamp album. And so I think that might be part of like how that culture is changing.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's the chapter 3 of my book is called Selling Lean Back Listening, and it's about basically the encouragement and rise and celebration of passive listening in the streaming economy, and the rise of what the music business calls functional music, which is like playlist categories that are like music for exercising, music for yoga, music for working, like music for XYZ, and how the rise of the playlist sort of like reimagined or reconceptualized people's relationship with music to favor music that like does well in these kind of like functional playlist categories. So I definitely think it's had an impact. It's really interesting to think about. I will say I think that like the diversification of how people get music beyond just like one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book is because Spotify has way too much influence over the music business and how people listen to music. I started hearing things like people saying like listening to Spotify instead of listening to music, similarly to how at a certain point a few years ago most people like seem to have like forgotten what the internet is, and they basically just like look at Facebook and Instagram, but like there's actually a lot of potential like in ways that you can do a lot of great things with the internet that aren't just like go on Facebook or go on Instagram. And I think similar with music, it's like it would be really positive if like there was more diversification of how people thought of digital music beyond just a small handful of apps.
Cool. I think we have really quick. Greg, do you have a really quick question? Is
I
it
don't know,
quick?
I want to know.
You can ask me.
We'll stop
Okay,
so
well,
you guys will be able to move around.
My question was, do you view Spotify as a uniquely bad streaming service when compared to the other ones? Or are the same criticisms you'd level at Spotify very similar as the other ones? And if so, in which ways is Spotify a uniquely bad streaming platform?
My perspective is that most of the criticisms made in the book are of the streaming model itself and not necessarily just about Spotify, but that I think Spotify is like an instructive story to tell because they're like the most popular and they sort of like influence the directions of the other streaming services. This is something you'll hear a lot, that like right now a lot of people in the music business see like Spotify is like way more AI driven and way more focused on like AI DJ and Daylist, and like other streaming services. There's kind of like a worry right now that other streaming services are going to follow their lead and see like, like if users are okay with like, a totally algorithmic, personalized, AI-driven like experience when they open the app, like maybe we should fire all our playlist curators and like do that too. So that's why. But I don't think that they're like, I think it's more criticism of the model than necessarily just them.
Sweet. Thanks again. We're good.
Yeah.
Just wanted to say thanks again to Basha and to Mocha Long Island for having us, and to all the bands. Stick around.
Read Liz's book. It's legitimately so good.
Oh yeah. Books for sale. Stick around. Bands. Calfish, The Mop's voicemail, warm wishes. Throw a couple bucks in if you haven't, and please eat some stuff. Thanks.